Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. A very special guest today, the District Attorney of Santa Barbara County, Joyce Dudley, is with us. It's a fascinating conversation in light of what's going on in the world right now. Stay tuned. Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Thank you for joining us. We have a special guest today. Joyce Dudley is with me. She is the District Attorney of Santa Barbara County. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Challenging times
Yes.
in our world and in our county.
Yes.
I wanted to start with just with the pandemic and kind of how that's affected. I've read there's been an uptick in domestic violence and different things. And how has your office approached that, and what's going on?
Thanks for asking. I think the uptick is an assumption on our part, because what's even scarier about this is based upon history. We believe there would be an uptake in all in-home crimes: domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse, and animal abuse, because people are inside, and there's a dangerous combination. They're inside, they don't have any outlets.
Yeah.
They're an arm's distance from alcohol or drugs. They're experiencing, in some cases, grief because someone close to them has been ill, financial duress because of the economy, and the combination of all of those stressors, plus the fact that they're home, plus the fact that mandated reporters don't have the kind of access that they would.
Right.
So there's a lack of reports, but we believe an increase in in-home crimes. And on March 13th, I gathered my executive staff and we discussed, what could all this mean? And at that time, there weren't yet forced closures, but we had a sense of what we were most worried about. All of us landed on in-home crimes. And from that point on, we started doing a whole bunch of community outreach and nation outreach on this particular topic.
Wow. And I read you did something with texting?
Well, now, if someone can call 911, we still expect them to call 911. But if they can't, because the perpetrator isn't allowing them the space to do that, they can text 911. And we were just thrilled when the Sheriff's Department was able to add that on to our tool belt as another way to help people.
Wow. That's amazing. You serve in various capacities. I know you're the state chair of the State Commission on Police Officer Standards and Training.
Right.
Which I'm sure is also an interesting place to be right now.
So, especially now.
Yeah.
That position, I was appointed by Governor Brown about 3 years ago. And about 2 years ago, Governor Brown made me the chair. So a new bill passed that said no longer would you move through the chairs in post, but rather the governor would actually pick the person he wanted to be the chair. And for your audience, what POST stands for is Police Officer Standards and Training. What it means is every law enforcement officer in the state of California, be they PD, SO, CHP, whatever, if they're post-certified, which they need to be in these establishments I've just mentioned, in these offices I've mentioned, they have to go through a post-certified academy and then continue post-training. The commission, which I was a part of, helps the executive director and the staff, about 150 people in Sacramento, determine what classes law enforcement officers should take, both at the academy and later. And now, of course, since the murder of George Floyd, there has been an increase in people being concerned about what kind of education law enforcement officers are having.
Right.
And especially in having watched those almost 9 minutes of him being killed, where are we with things like the carotid artery restraint?
Right.
At our last post meeting, which was predominantly Zoomed with me and the other commissioners, but I went to Sacramento, we actually voted, and it was a historic vote, to say that post would no longer teach the carotid restraint as a form of a hold, and both the academy and the classes, which doesn't mean it's against the law. It means post isn't going to teach it anymore. Now, what everybody saw happen to George Floyd was not a carotid restraint. that was someone being choked out by someone's knee. That would never be legal. It would never be anything anybody would teach.
I see.
But so in addition to my role as the district attorney, I'm very involved in making sure that law enforcement officers throughout California are appropriately trained.
So that commission decides training for CHP, sheriffs,
everybody.
So it doesn't obviously make law, but it sets training protocols.
Correct. There are some interesting places where it overlaps, because there was a oath that all law enforcement officers had to take when they were sworn in. The oath had been around forever, and it only responded to the pronoun of an officer as he. I wanted to change it, surprise, surprise, to be gender neutral.
Right.
And so that was in fact quite a process of getting the commission to vote on it, getting feedback from the law enforcement officers throughout the state, and then eventually codifying it. So in some ways we do that too.
So there is an overlap, but
Yes.
primarily it's a training. So
It
that
is
would
all training, yeah.
that would seem like a critical commission today.
Critical.
I mean, in terms
Never
of
more so.
everything's being looked at, right?
Everything. And I think that people are thinking that training is going to be the answer to everything. And of course it's not.
Right.
But it's an important part.
Right.
And many politicians are now wanting to all of a sudden, change the training for post.
Right.
They believe that that will deal with racial disparity as well as potential law enforcement violence. Before that, before COVID, we were looking at officer-involved shootings and when officers use deadly force. So before COVID, we actually, the legislature changed the law, and then I chose 2 other district attorneys in the state. We made a video on the change in the law. So we didn't make the law, but legislators made the law passed, and then we were responsible for making sure every law enforcement officer in California knew the new law on when they could use deadly force.
I see.
I thought the name of the show was Good News. Everything I've been talking about so far is incredibly sad.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Okay.
First of all, I read a quote from you, which I thought was powerful. And you talked about, I can't count the number of crime scenes I've seen, the number of crime photos I've reviewed. But you said, you can count the times you quickly turned away because of how sickened you were. And that happened once, and it was George Floyd.
Right. And even as you say it, I well up with tears. Understand, as the prosecutor, I come in after the fact. I don't see crimes being committed. I look at them afterwards, and I look at them carefully. I've been to countless autopsies, some incredibly sad, some babies who've been killed, and it's my job to look at those autopsies, and it's my job to be there so I can make a decision about whether a criminal case whether there's been a criminal case and whether someone's violated the law. So I always look carefully, I always stand back so that I can make a decision that's based on the law and justice. But I've never seen anyone murdered. Who has? And there you get to watch the horrible, horrible vision of someone being killed. And I've worked with law enforcement officers for 30 years, and they're people I admire and respect. So all of a sudden I'm seeing the first murder I've ever seen, and it being perpetrated by a law enforcement officer. And it sickened me. And the first time I saw it, I had the same reaction everybody else has. And then after that, every time it came on, I had to avert my eyes.
Yeah.
And I'm not the kind of person who averts her eyes. I have to see it all to make good decisions. I already knew what happened. It was a murder. I didn't need to see it again. And it broke my heart that it was a law enforcement officer, because I think I also said in that article, the law enforcement officers I know would rush in to change, to protect, to save George Floyd. The last thing they would do is perpetrate a murder.
Right, right. It hit me hard.
Hit everybody.
I mean, it was, we've had things, Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin, we've had incidents, but this one stopped the world, it felt like.
It did.
I mean, for 3 days I was like, what do I do?
Yeah.
I mean, and then, of course, we have a conversation now going in the country. I had a conversation with a gospel singer, African-American woman in Nashville. And it was fascinating because she has 3 sons. And I was sitting here in Montecito, California. I have 2 sons. Right after the George Floyd thing happened, one of my sons had some buddies over, and he says, "Hey, Dad, can we walk to CVS to get some candy?" I've never said no, ever, right? Never thought about it, right? I talked to my friend Nicole C. Mullen in Nashville. Her sons can't go toilet paper a house with their friends. The friends can go. Her son can't go because of the risk. She has to think about walking to CVS. And I'm just, little old me.
I know.
I just haven't thought this way before. And I just feel like a lot of people are thinking about this right now.
They are.
Do you feel like this might be a moment where something significant changes?
I do. And I think it happens because of what you just experienced. Thoughtful people like you pausing and saying, wait a minute, something I've taken for granted is not. I'll give you a perfect example in a high profile person. So my best friend is Jackie Lacey. Jackie Lacey is the district attorney of Los Angeles. Jackie is African American, black, whatever term you want to use. She came up to Santa Barbara 3 weekends after the Floyd incident. And she and her husband were sitting opposite our friend Ralph and I at dinner. And we were talking about racial disparity because for Jackie, that was a horrible murder. A lot of horrible murders happen in LA. But the insidious racial disparity that she has lived with all her life, and her parents told her early on, you can be and do anything. You're just going to have to be twice as good as somebody else because you're black. Twice as good. And she bought into it. And she rose to the level of being the district attorney in the biggest DA's office in the world. So when I get on a plane, if I need protection, I go with my DA chief investigator. He carries a gun. He fills out paper in an airport. We walk onto the plane together. He introduces himself to the pilot, tells the pilot where he's sitting, and the two of us sit down. Jackie, I don't think I can do this without crying. Jackie, when she's the district attorney of Los Angeles, she walked on a plane with her 2 chiefs. Both were armed, introduced themselves to the pilot. The pilot took one look at her and said, "Is she in custody?"
Oh.
The only difference between Jackie and Joyce is Jackie's black and Joyce is white. What an outrageous statement. And I turned to her, because I started crying when she told me. I said, how come I'm your best friend and I've never heard that story?
Right.
And then her husband sitting next to her said, I'm your husband and I've never heard that story. And she started to cry and she said, I just don't tell you guys everything. It's constant.
Right.
And she's also such an upbeat person. She knew going into this that she would have to work twice as hard. I think she knew going into it she would have to have moments like that. When did we as a society decide that was okay?
Right.
That's outrageous.
Right.
And yet that's where we've been living, which is why I think, to your point, yes, we're at a pivotal moment, and yes, things are going to change.
Yes. Yeah, I had another interview here with a successful attorney, black, about my age, and same kind of experiences. He started relaying. He says, Dean, it's exhausting.
Yep.
Getting on an elevator and the parent pulls the child a little close. Just that I've never thought about. And if, hopefully if I'm thinking about it, if other people are thinking about it, then we can all think about it.
I think that's the best thing, if we can all get it, slow
Yes.
down and get it, and really
Yes.
get it. And I think whenever I'm a mother of 4, a grandmother of 4, whenever I can relate it to these precious children in my life, it's home. And it's got to hit home for it to make a difference. It hit home for you.
Yeah.
It's hit home for me.
Yeah.
So maybe this is the time.
Yeah. I heard one of my mentors one time talked about the definition of discernment.
Discernment?
Discernment. He said, discernment is looking at something from every different angle, different side. And I was thinking about you and your job.
Right.
And this particular moment in time. You've worked with law enforcement officers for 30 years. You know them well. You, I'm assuming, love them a lot.
I do.
And they're such good people.
They are.
And yet here we are in this moment where, because of this history we talked about, the exhaustion of a lot of folks, the advent of the smartphone where these incidents are being captured, there's this tremendous anger towards the police. How, in your job, how do you see this, and how do you approach that in the community to help to realize the anger's real, the hurt's real, and yet law enforcement's great for the large part, but we don't want. But when you say that, sometimes it can be almost discounting. Well, have you seen the video? You know, how do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I'm really happy that there are cell phones now, because what I find sad is that if you watch the news over and over again, you'll find the cop behaving badly. You don't see a whole lot of stories about what happens 99% of the time, which is cops behaving well, because that would not make news.
Right.
But regardless, I'm glad that tapes are being made. I'm glad people are being held accountable. There's just as many, in my mind, bad cops as there are bad coaches, bad teachers, bad nurses, bad dentists, bad ministers, bad priests, and I've prosecuted every single profession I've just described to you. I have prosecuted all of them for sexual assault. So I can tell you, and physical abuse. So people are people, and they choose professions for whatever reason they choose profession, and a certain percentage of them are going to be bad, evil, wrong, egocentric, whatever word you want to use, and they're going to behave badly. And when they do, they need to be held accountable. And I believe that law enforcement officers, like everybody else, at times behaves badly. Absolutely, we watched the murder of George Floyd, and that person be tried for murder. No problem with that. But I don't want people to extend that beyond the reality. Most people are good. Most people are so good, and law enforcement officers are right there with it. I'm very concerned about what's happening now with law enforcement. I believe what happened on the Brooklyn Bridge recently, where in New York, several law enforcement officers were helping ministers protest and go across the bridge, and they were beaten and kicked and bloodied and so badly hurt. And I'm friends with the Manhattan District Attorney and the New York City Assistant Deputy, and I sent them both, please give me an address I can write to, because I think the more community members reach out to law enforcement officers who've been hurt, injured, killed. Because right now, my biggest problem as the chief, as the chair of post, is going to be recruitment and retention. Why would anybody want to be a cop right now? Well, I wouldn't want my own children to be cops right now. And if I'm saying that, what are other people saying? And then why would anybody want to stay in the profession? Most cops I know went into it because they wanted to help. They wanted to make a difference. They wanted to get the bad guys and protect the good guys. But now people have such low opinions, and now they're in a dangerous situation when they're doing their job. So we're having a meeting in August, the commissioners, to discuss this very real problem of recruitment, retention, and morale.
We want to encourage good people to go into that profession.
We really do.
And some people are just, it just seems like so many of these men and women are built to protect.
They are.
It's in their DNA or something. And we need them.
We do.
We want them.
And we want the smart ones to join, not the smart ones to leave. Yeah, we do need them. We do love them. We do want them.
Yes, and that's, I think that's a wonderful message that we can get out.
I do too.
We love you, and just what you said is perfect. I mean, whatever profession, you've prosecuted them all. There's
every profession I just named, I prosecuted. Doctors, nurses, dentists.
And that leads me to my
ministers, priests, the whole group.
You've seen it all. Well, I have two more questions. But one is the justice gap. I always think about this. I worked in an organization earlier in my career that was focused on the poor and access to legal counsel. Because if you're charged with a crime, you have right to a defense, but and a lot of other things. And we would see, we would, in that particular case, we had attorneys that would volunteer at clinics and would help, poor people, because in the three most common areas that we saw were housing, job-related expungement, and family law related to kids.
Sure, of course.
And I was thinking those are the three biggest areas of life, arguably. Roof over your head.
Throw in, yeah.
I mean,
that's it.
and my eyes were open to how little access even middle class people, it's hard to afford an attorney, but certainly.
Right.
What would be your thoughts on how we can help close the justice gap?
Well, two thoughts. One is, if you're indigent, you have access to the public defender's office and legal aid. And I have tremendous respect for both those groups of lawyers. They're really good. They just have hearts of gold and brains of brilliance. So if you're very indigent, again, you have access to this. If you're very wealthy, you also have great access.
Right.
So my concern, and yours is the same, is that group in the middle, that hardworking group that has too much money to qualify for that, but not enough money to qualify for this. When people ask me about the injustice of our legal system, I say it's across the board injustice, poor, and socioeconomic condition. You're going to get the best medical care if you have money. You're going to get the best housing. You're going to get the best education. There really isn't anything that money can't buy a better condition. I mean, clearly you can't buy a better home. You can't avoid domestic violence if you have money, but everything else is just easier. And the other thing is education. So my grandfather was homeless. He came to America and he lived in between the tenements in New York, 100% homeless. And he ended up selling overripe fruit during the middle of the night to the other homeless people and sewing the homeless people's socks. And by the time, so he was able to make a penny on a certain amount of fruit and a couple of pennies on sewing, and eventually had enough money so that he could live in a tenement with 30 other Jewish people who had made it from the streets into a tenement. So, and he was somebody I grew up with all my life.
Wow.
So how do you go from homeless, my sister's a doctor, I'm a lawyer. You go right in the middle to my extraordinary parents who said, education is power. You know, my dad barely made it out of high school. My mom, God bless her, she died last year. She went to night school for 17 years to get her bachelor's degree. She not only worked 2 jobs so my sister and I could go to school, but she also felt she wanted to be a role model. So when I got my second master's degree at UCSB, she and I actually walked down. I asked if we could walk together. I was pregnant. She was my mom. She finally got her BA degree.
My goodness.
So education is what makes the difference. So now I can afford to live in Santa Barbara. I could be elected to district attorney when my grandfather was homeless and dirt poor, because somebody said, we're going to invest in her education.
Wow.
And they made it happen.
Wow.
Education's the great equalizer. I mean, Jackie gets to be the district attorney because she went to USC as an undergraduate, USC Law School, and now she's the DA.
Right.
So before I was a lawyer, I was the director of Head Start for Santa Barbara County. And Head Start is a magnificent program. It's a great equalizer. Kids who don't have preschool educations and go to kindergarten are ill-equipped. And immediately they start out losing. And when you don't do well in school and you don't feel successful in school, it puts you in the 70% of people that aren't going to do well in life. But if you come into kindergarten prepared, ready, you feel good about yourself, you're going to have such a higher chance of being successful and staying in school. So when people talk to me about my early childhood experience teaching and education and administration at Head Start versus now, I'll tell everyone I did more to prevent crime when I was the director of Head Start than I could ever do as a district attorney. Because as I told you 20 minutes ago, I come in after the crime.
Right.
When I was doing Head Start, I was preparing and making a difference for these children.
Right.
So one of the organizations I'm on the executive board for is a national organization called Fight Crime, Invest in Kids. And I lobby legislators in Sacramento to put money into education. So I feel very strongly about that.
That's a game changer.
Absolutely.
For families like yours.
It was a game changer for me.
Right.
It would be a game changer for Jackie. It was a game changer for anyone.
Right. Last question.
Sure.
You have a tough job. And we think about you. We pray for you. And we're thankful for you.
Thank you. I need every one of those prayers.
Yeah, well, you got them. You see the worst in humanity.
I do.
How do you not become either, highly cynical, depressed? Because I was struck by what you said a few minutes ago, which is people are wonderful. People are wonderful. There's just this sliver of, but you spend all of your time working with the sliver.
I do.
How do you stay hopeful?
I think I came out of the chute happy. I think I've always been a happy person. What's surprising is that I go into this field, but I came from a home where there was no child abuse at all. And the first time I was aware that children could be abused when I was a senior in high school, and I walked into the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, and I saw children who had been taken away from their parents and abused. And because I had no idea this was possible, I was shocked that this could happen, and a light went off inside me. I thought, I gotta do something about this. So I've always viewed the most horrible crimes that come into my office, and me personally when I was prosecuting them in court, as a chance to do something. God's given me, He's put me here to make a difference, and that invigorates me.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody else handling those cases. I've been blessed with this ability. I want to go do that. I want to bring comfort and peace. I want to move victims to survivors. I want to hold people accountable for their bad actions. Bring it on.
Wow. That's beautiful. Wonderful way to end.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in the middle of a pandemic and lots of else. Thanks for making time for us.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing the show.
Yeah, thank you. We'll see you next time.